председатель правительства Российской Федерации Дмитрий Анатольевич Медведев.
This is the chairman of the government of the Russian Federation, Mr. Dmitry Anatольевич Medvedev.
So interesting, I'm enlightening. A very good day, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. I cordially welcome you in Moscow to the International Cybersecurity Congress. It's the second time that it brings together public authorities, international organizations, business community, and security professionals from all over the world. The interest towards this event keeps growing, and it is important that not just narrow niche specialists attend, but also public authorities and business community. Unless the government looks into that matter, all the efforts by professionals and business community will be thwarted, will come to a flop. This is why several years ago Sberbank organized an interagency meeting that I presided over, and we started coming up with a set of measures to fight cybersecurity in order to consolidate our legal framework that was not up to the mark at that time, and we came up with standards to protect digital sectors and other sectors from cyber threats. Several years ago, we were only bracing for the advent of the digital era, and we didn't know back then that we already were living in that, and we're living in this era now. It's a new normal. Without the free flow and exchange of data in the World Wide Web, it's impossible to make headway, no matter what are the stances of different political activists or business champions. Progress is impossible without digital development, and digital services have changed the situation altogether, and the education and medicine have undergone dramatic change. Internet, as is known, today is used by more than 4 billion people, and mobile devices by more than 5 billion people, more than half of the Earth's population. Without a doubt, this number will, at the end of the day, coincide with the total population of the Earth. In this country, we have a very good standing. Also, we are implementing our own national digital economy program. We have one of the highest levels of mobile and digital and internet penetration, and the network access price is one of the lowest globally, and this rate of growth that the economy of the Russian segment of the internet has been posting is something any country can only dream of, and we're advancing at a rapid pace of up to 15% per annum. This is good, but digitalization and the rapid growth of technology and the novel technology, state-of-the-art things, also are fraught with risks and threats. Analysts estimate that global toll from cyber attacks may rise to $2.5 trillion this year. Just dwell upon this figure, upon this number. I just met representatives of the African Export-Import Bank, and the overall total GDP of the African countries will be $2.5 trillion this year, is projected at this value. So $2.5 trillion is the GDP, the size of the GDP of a huge continent, although still developing. The scale is gigantic, and the cybercrime is in top 5 global risks of the World Economic Forum rating, and the international experts community puts it several notches higher than other threats and perils such as terrorism and global environmental issues and others. And us, like other countries, annually register tens of millions of cyber attacks against our public websites and private websites. You all know the examples and instances that relate to governmental websites and websites of some of the high officials. All the advantages of digitalization will become null and void unless we're able to come up with a sound stonewall and protection system. We have decided to incentivize the development of Russian proprietary software, and in the framework of that digital economy program, there is a section on info security, on cyber security, so mechanisms to facilitate the market share of Russian software will appear. But we also need, and nothing today is done in this respect, we also need to come up with universal standards of providing security. Just now we had a quick word with the colleagues. Sometimes we interact with our partners. I will not name them, but and those tell us quite often we don't have confidence and trust between us, between you and us. We are at odds with you, so we fall out quite often. We'll not cooperate on that matter either, which is a strange and weird and dangerous position that pushes us aside to the periphery, sidelines us to a stage of international relations that we had at the end of the 19th century. So we should come up with universal standards of cybersecurity, because those offences and crimes that are perpetrated via the World Wide Web know no borders, and I hope that my colleagues in different countries will become aware of that. The first steps were moved and made late last year. The United Nations General Assembly passed and adopted a resolution by Russia on countering the ICT for criminal purposes, and a working group on cybersecurity was established. And this may be comprised by all member states of the United Nations now. It consists of around 100 countries. We're ready to cooperate, to share knowledge and best practices in cybersecurity, and we advocate for equitable and fair world order in the digital area. But to be straightforward, I must say that public sector alone can't resolve the issue of cyber threats. We need the active engagement of everybody else, including the business community. And I'm pleased to note that the Russian entrepreneurs were among the first ones to support establishing a center of fight against cyber security, and the Cyber Security Center of the World Economic Forum, based on the public-private partnership principle. So we can join hands and team up in fighting cyber threats and cyber crime. I wish you every success in your work and in your deliberations. I'm sure that this event that has already become a tradition will become another step in our joint, safe and secure digital future. Thank you.
Prime Minister, thank you, and Mr. Greff will be returning shortly. So welcome everybody to this first panel on the secure digital world, the future or utopia. I should also say it's going to be the last main plenary like this for this conference. I would like to introduce our panelists at this stage. I want it to be a conversation, but to get you going, I need to just mobilize this, which is low tech, and you should have found it on your seat, because we're going to mobilize this shortly. So make sure you have it, that it works, and I'm going to be asking you to make a decision on using the numbers 1 or 2 shortly. So that's my heads up at the moment. Let me introduce the panel who are with me here on the platform to discuss whether this is really moving in a very sinister direction, a direction which is sinister simply because of the overwhelming nature, as we've just heard from the Prime Minister. First of all is Alois Zwingi, welcome. Who is from Switzerland, who is a member of the managing board and head of the Center for Cybersecurity at the World Economic Forum. We're going to be hearing a lot about your research and what you're seeing particularly in business around the world. Secondly, Elvira Nabiullina, welcome, who's governor of the Central Bank of Russia. We want to reflect very much the challenges in the financial sector, the banking world. Thirdly, to Maxim Akimov, welcome, who is Deputy Prime Minister for the Russian Federation and is responsible for the digital transformation of the economy, the transformation of government, of ICT, of communications, transport, and logistics. That's your day job. Welcome. Fourthly, Kirat Kelimbetov, welcome from Astana in Kazakhstan, who is governor of the Astana International Financial Center, which is building very quickly and at the center of so much in the financial world and building a new center of excellence down in Astana. And of course, Herman Greff, who everyone knows, the chief executive and chairman of the executive board of Sberbank. So let's now set the tone. And we want to really ask you a question. Can the world be as good as this? Let's have a 2-minute video just to give you an impression of the very positive side of what could happen in the coming years.
Недалекое будущее.
The not-so-distant future. The world is becoming digital, as in the real world, but cybersecurity is seeing the emergence of boundaries, freedoms and rights. The digital personalities contain the full biometric profiles of all the humans on Earth. This information is used to get the different services, to ensure the security of users, and to further develop IT systems in the world. Thanks to smart transportation systems, driverless vehicle networks have been expanding. Traffic is governed by sensors. Robot medics are identifying even uncommon illnesses. The average life expectancy has already reached 120 years and keeps on rising. We are witnessing extensive exploration of space. New breakthroughs and scientific discoveries have been made. Biotech achievements have, along with VR and AR, expanded the capabilities of humans. The citizen of the future finds pretty nothing impossible, yet the world has almost forgot the problems of cybercrime. Law enforcement agencies are effectively interacting and stopping the world's largest cybercriminal groups. Private companies have coordinated to cooperate in dedicated cybersecurity centers and successfully fend off cyber attacks. Digital threats have been ever fewer with each passing day. None of this is a utopia, but a potential future of the digital world, and it is within our power to make it that interrelated, transparent and secure.
So that's the great way our world can be. Often we can think of that in very short notice terms, but my question to you, as you use this, it's a very simple question. Is there a chance that such a world could become a reality? You have 20 seconds. Please start the clock. Is there a chance that such a world could become a reality? The options are: number 1, yes, we can achieve this. Number 2, no, cyber criminals will always be one step ahead. Number 1, yes, we can achieve this. No, cyber criminals will always be one step ahead. Let's see what you have decided. Well, it's caution, concern, anxieties. We should be delighted that 41% of you, that's 2/5 of you, actually feel pretty optimistic. I'm not sure the next hour will leave you that optimistic, but we'll wait and see. So no, cyber criminals will always be one step ahead, 58%. Thank you. Let's now drill deep down into where we are going, what the state is at the moment. And Alois, I need to come to you first because you have been studying this. You are monitoring this all the time at the World Economic Forum. I'm going to ask each of you in 30 seconds to really give your view of that one question. And then I'll come down and ask you for more detail, if I may, Alois. Should we feel deeply vulnerable at the moment? And I'm going to ask each of you on the platform in a moment. But Alois, 30 seconds, please.
Yes, we should. And the reason why we should is actually there's a couple of things that are missing nowadays to make us feel comfortable. I think our top leaders don't have cybersecurity as a top priority, and that doesn't matter if it's government leaders, business leaders, university leaders, civil society leaders. And the second thing that should make us worried is actually there's no global framework for this. If there would be one, it's not moving at the speed that we required.
Governor, do you think that there is an awareness of just how vulnerable everyone is at the moment, whether you're dealing with a bank, a central bank like yours, or a normal bank, or indeed just business, not just in the Russian Federation, but right across the world?
I think, yes, we should all feel vulnerable, but we should not feel helpless. And I think the job in hand for all of us is to be at least moving apace with the cyber criminals in their thoughts, in using the new tech. We should be trying to be one step ahead. I think neglecting cybersecurity issues is a problem for the society, and this is a lack of understanding primarily on the level of first persons in the companies in the financial sector that I'm responsible for in Russia. And to be effective, yes, we do need to become aware of this level of threat, and it is pretty high.
Involved in transformation, are you dealing with large numbers of people and organizations who simply don't get it?
Either they don't get it or they cannot rise up to the colossal and expanding over this 1 year gap between the level of threats and the capability to respond to those threats. The alarm over the growing schism, over the growing gap between the threat level and the capability to respond, yes. The situation has not simplified. As Elvira Sahibzadovna, Ms. Nabiullina, has said, this should not grow to be a paranoia and despair. This is not the cause for despair, but it is a cause for very grave concern. And a lot of people do not understand, very few people actually do understand how big the chasm is and how fast the move is.
Deputy Prime Minister, thank you. Now let me go to Mr. Kilimbatov. Your view from Astana as you've been setting up this enormous new center of excellence for finance. Do you believe you're dealing with an industry, both in Kazakhstan and also elsewhere, which gets the enormity of the vulnerability or not?
Going back to the framing of the question that we voted for, that does remind me of this philosophical paradox of Zenon, when Achilles is really chasing tortoise. You know, technologies would seem to be developing, and we are aware of how to respond to a lot of threats, but then the cybercriminals keep one step ahead. On the other hand, we are aware that those cybercriminals are not just attacking those well-prepared companies, they are probably attacking the weaker companies, the weaker link. Either they are not prepared, those smaller companies, or they are trying to find those human entrance points, injection points. And if we are to go back to what has been said already, yes, we are living in the times of the fourth industrial revolution that Klaus Schwab keeps reminding us of, and the pace of change is really, really fast. The banks are going online, all the data is now in the cloud, and the faster we are moving in this direction and the faster the new threats are emerging. If Sberbank are pretty active in countering these threats, unfortunately, not all the other members of the global community are prepared. And yes, we are one of the leaders. We are trying to expect the financial landscape to be evolving gravely towards the new financial services that are digital as well as conventional. And yes, the level of cybersecurity is becoming a definitive sector. Without the cybersecurity, development of fintech will be very, very complicated indeed, because the regulators are going to start asking a lot of questions. I think from the very start, we need to move in this direction and understand jointly the threats that are facing us. The International Financial Center in Astana, together with Sberbank, yes, we are thinking that this initiative to build up a coalition against cyber threats should expand and should cover a lot of regions, including the region of the Eurasian Economic Union and Central Asia.
Asking questions on this issue, a critical issue, not just in the fintech business and banking, but German Greff, let me come to you. Do you sleep soundly at night? Are you comfortable with the enormous bank that you revitalized, where innovation is central?
You know, I would like to give a simple answer to this question. You know, the simple answer would be yes. I am able to sleep well, and I can give you a lot of reasons for why I am sleeping well, but I would like to give a different response. You know, the deeper you go, the deeper you immerse yourself into the problems of cybersecurity, the worse your sleep at night is. And these are completely directly related issues. The relationship is completely direct. And when you understand how difficult it is to protect all the elements of the modern systems, then you genuinely become aware that for that you need not just powerful competencies in-house inside the company, you also need a lot of cooperation. And together with our partners, we are pitting just one idea to this forum. We made this absolute discovery and conclusion for ourselves a couple of years ago. One, we feel vulnerable and we feel fear of the future because we see that we will not be able to cope with this problem on our own. There's an increasing process of digitalization, and the risks of cybersecurity are growing exponentially. And for this reason, I will sleep much better if I can feel that we have a broad coalition against a broad coalition of hackers. That is actually a reality.
Check, if I may, Mr. Greff. We did use the word, or you used the word before we came on the platform, you need to be paranoid. Is that what everyone out there should be, paranoid?
Well, that is perhaps a powerful word, paranoia is. But if we talk about the first executives of major companies, yes, they should be paranoid about those issues of cybersecurity. The problem is that not only we are responsible for our own systems, we have hundreds of millions of customers. And that is a huge issue that should be perhaps driving us to paranoia. We should never stop developing in this direction. The answer is, in short, yes.
Well, let's get a reality check now from the World Economic Forum, because the Prime Minister mentioned cybercrime in the top 5 of the global risks, much higher than it has been, and it's moving closer to the top. Alois, you're contributing the data, which is leading to that, but help us understand, particularly from the human side of companies and directors and chief executives and chairmen, just how vulnerable they really are, and with some examples.
I think if you go back a few years, if you would have made a board exercise or an exercise with the board of directors of a company about how to react in the moment of a cyber attack, you would probably have witnessed a group of very professional and very accomplished people totally helpless, really not knowing how to react in such a crisis, because it is a type of crisis or a type of issue that really came up just over the last few years, and we experimented with that at the World Economic Forum about 3 years ago, and that really led us to the creation of the Center for Cybersecurity. And we have issued about 2 years ago guiding principles for boards, just very simple 10 questions that a member of a board needs to think about, because the issue of cybersecurity is not a technical problem. Of course it is a technical problem, but when you are a board member or a top executive, it is actually a strategic problem. It is an existential problem. And you're all aware about the experience that the globally operating logistics company AP Moller-Maersk went through about 2 years ago. Just 2-3 months before they were victim of a attack, they did an audit, they did a check, and actually they did very well in that audit. So they felt they were prepared. When the crisis hit, they realized actually there is no Control-Alt-Delete button to press. They literally had to reinstall the entire IT base over a couple of weeks. Their workers, their employees.
The entire ITBs. The entire.
We're talking thousands of servers and tens of thousands of pieces of hardware had to be installed from scratch. The reason why that company didn't disappear is because their human resources, their employees actually were resilient enough and inventive enough. They went to their customers, actually sat in the offices of their customers to re-establish data and information so that they would know where all their products were in the world.
But they weren't prepared for it at all.
That was not part of the crisis playbook that they had prepared. Now, what is interesting is how they dealt with that crisis. It was really a learning opportunity for that company, and now they say cybersecurity is actually a strategic differentiator to the competition. And I think that's a beautiful example that we can learn from and adapt in our organization, be it companies or ministries or universities.
What about not just enormous corporations with significant financial resources like AP Moller-Maersk, but other companies as well, SMEs, and the impact on them? They haven't the first clue of what's happening.
Yeah, this is a very important point, and as Nick said, I'm from Switzerland. Can you imagine, a couple of weeks back, we had a butcher shop being attacked and shut down with ransomware. Now, that really made the headlines in Switzerland because it's an example that it can hit any one of us. And in the case of Switzerland, we can be thankful that there is a public-private initiative called Digital Switzerland that now tries to educate the general public, literally the person on the street, how vulnerable each and every one is, but also what kind of precautions, very practically, each and every one can take.
And educating politicians, the lawmakers.
I think that's an important element because I'm just referring of Switzerland. Many of our politicians and lawmakers are still in the era of the telephone book. And so we really need to make sure that they understand the opportunities but also the threats. And that same association, Digital Switzerland, actually 2 days ago had a major event in our capital raising the awareness and educating our members of parliament about the great opportunities that we have, as the video has shown, but also what we need to take care of in our laws, in our rules, that this is actually happening.
I'm going to ask you this question as well, Alois. I'm going to give you 1 minute notice. I want to ask how many of you are paranoid about what you face in your business, or not paranoid. I'm not going to ask you to use the machine, just use your hands. Do you think people, picking up what Herman Greff has said, are paranoid, or at least aware enough or sensitized enough, depending on which verb you use and which adjective you use?
Frankly, no. I don't think today we worry about this. And I sometimes use the analogy of drinking water. If we go back 200 years ago, we would all be terribly worried where we drink our water from. And 200 years later, we sort of solved this problem, at least in large parts of the world. And because each and everyone here in the room is very much aware that it's obviously safer to drink water out of such a bottle than just go into the next stream. And I think this is the kind of behavior we have to develop as individuals, but also as societies, so that in 200 years, actually, cyberspace is as safe as, moving in cyberspace is as safe as drinking water.
Well, let me just check. Hands up. Who's paranoid about this within the audience? You're safe among friends here. Who's not paranoid? Who thinks they've got it all under control? We're getting a lot of people who are not putting up their hands at all. So they're sitting on them electronically and also physically. So I think we're seeing a lot of unwillingness to commit, but I would say there were more who put up their hands about paranoia than not paranoid. Governor, and also Deputy Prime Minister, I think I need to ask you, what are you seeing inside your organizations of awareness of, whether we call it paranoia or not, of the enormity of the existential threat, whether it be in the Russian bank, Governor, or the banks you're dealing with, or many organizations?
Well, I feel the risk, yet not the paranoia, because, well, paranoia in Russian language is actually the disease, the psychiatric disease. But the feeling of risk, yes, we do have that. And we're not only concerned about the risks that we have and the gap that we have, but we are, this feeling of risk really is generated by the following. I think that we underestimate this risk. We're not acknowledging it enough. Why we're not acknowledging it enough? Well, there is some complacency, because if you look at the figures in the financial sector, they actually show quite a good situation. Yes, last year the level of attacks increased by 30%, yet the losses declared by the financial institutions is around 0.0002%. It's much less than our standards. It's much less than you have in the payment systems. So you have this kind of a false feeling that the risk is exaggerated. The CEOs of companies and the banks think, oh, that's okay. It went fine. I'll just appoint a cybersecurity chief officer, and he will resolve all the problems. But I agree with all the colleagues. It's not a technical problem. It is a problem of governance, of management of cyber risks. And we do have some questions to answer here, because we do not know how to manage cyber risks. Yes, and actually, legislators understand this risk, the magnitude of this risk. I wouldn't say that they're complacent, because from last year, the central bank as a regulator is authorized to oversee the financial institutions from the perspective of how do they follow the cybersecurity requirements. Last year we checked 58 banks. This year we have checked 75 banks, and we found problems in all of them. Violations in all of them. They were not critical in their nature, but they might become critical, might become serious if the financial institutions do not pay enough attention to that. And what are the main reasons? First of all, business processes in financial institutions do not include cyber risk management section. Even if you have a person, if you have a competent person with good skills, an expert, he can do nothing because the business processes do not cater for that. Do not include that. And, well, there is a shortage of talent. The risks are very serious, and, you can compare the situation with the situation that we had several years ago. Like, if we change the process of sharing the information, everyone will be protected, and that will be fine. There will be one scenario. But now there are many scenarios, and manifold scenarios, and they change, they evolve, and you cannot be ready. You cannot have some party to say to you, okay, this is going to be the threat, prepare for it. No, we're are living in uncertainty. Any organization should be ready for this uncertainty, and the level of talents should be different, and training these talents and experts is a key issue. We, by the way, have prepared a professional standard in this area, and we're not only talking about standardization, but about the fact that the organizations should be aware of that. They should train their people, and they should include in the business processes the cybersecurity aspects.
Question of the Deputy Prime Minister with all the ministries and organizations you're dealing with, Deputy Prime Minister. But Governor, just within the Bank of Russia, what are you experiencing in terms of the human ability to understand among those who've worked in your bank for a long time the enormity of what is now happening and how they have to change their mentality?
I think this is the most challenging question, really. I mean, changing mentality, what does that mean? That's the most challenging thing. When a person understands a problem, acknowledges the problem, he or she starts to act, and we need to acknowledge the problem before it is a large-scale problem. I mean, in terms of the evolution of technologies, we had a good video, really, that really shows how quickly the technologies are developing, and we need to understand that this is all happening very quickly, at the breakneck pace, and we have to make sure that we assign the significance to that. In terms of mentality, everyone is working in the competitive environment, and sometimes people save on and economize on the security issues, but security from cyber risks and the level of cybersecurity soon is going to be a competitive edge, because people would rely on those institutions, will trust those institutions and organizations where they're confident that the level of their cybersecurity is very high, because people are becoming more and more concerned, and business community have to understand that to change your mentality, you need to change your mentality, because you can actually make profits on cybersecurity if you invest in it now.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. The same, Mr. Kellenbetov, and I'll come to the Deputy Prime Minister quickly. Yes.
Я бы хотел о 3 аспектах поговорить. Вот мне кажется.
Just 3 aspects. Wake-up call, I think, is the word that we need to use, because we need to understand that changes are happening at breakneck speed, really. 3 big areas here, just to build on what Madam Nabulina told about. She said that cybersecurity has to become an integral part of corporate governance and risk management. We have been implementing the highest standards of corporate governance for quite a while now, and we understand that you have the corporate governance on paper and the real one. The same with cybersecurity. I think that the corporate world has not really understood the scale of the problem, and it's not only the banking structures, but all the entire infrastructure around it. The data that are stored in consulting companies, in courts, intellectual property in universities, this is not adequately protected, and we have to actively work on that, work to improve its security. The second topic that was voiced by Sberbank on this Congress is the cross-border cooperation. Cyber criminals are working without borders, and therefore our response should have no borders. There should be no borders. And the third important thing is that it is going to be a competitive edge. Yes, Madam Nabulina, and Sberbank really shows how they are ready. They show their level of readiness. How do they respond to the attacks, and how do they respond to any technology risk? And I think a major issue here is that we need to create the environment for young, talented people who would help the companies to fight with the criminals. And for them, you need to create this kind of a regulatory sandbox. Sberbank is creating the ecosystem. In their part, we as an international financial center, Astana, are creating this sandbox for the Asian countries of the Asian Union.
Very quickly, you make a very important point there. Young, talented people. You seem to be suggesting it's tough for those who've been in a business for a long time to understand and appreciating. I can see Alois nodding there, but you actually said young. In other words, there's an ageist element to that. Is that right?
Well, there are this problem is two-faceted. Yes, cyber criminals are one step ahead And young talented people are working for cyber criminal groups. And therefore, they should have, on the other side, we should have young talented people too. But the cybersecurity awareness is relevant for everyone, because right now all people on the planet use social media, share photos, log in Instagram and Facebook, and they need to understand their level of responsibility.
Picking up on those points, just pick up from your point of view, given the enormity of your portfolio, you are facing a massive mindset challenge, whether in Russia or every government minister around the world, faced with this transformation issue at high speed.
Well, I can say that I'm not a paranoid. I like digital world and I like to live with it. I can prove it to you. Go into a psychiatric ward, they would prove that I'm healthy, no paranoia. But anyway, the vision that I would like to change, and the three answers that I would like to, the three responses that I would like to propose and suggest, three vivid trends that have this kind of basic attributes to them. First of all, the revolutionary growth of the technologies in terms of this cybersecurity agenda. Anyway, these technologies are very, very expensive. They are not readily available. They're end-to-end. And if you have these technologies like AI and wireless networks, 5Gs, the networks that ensure IoT, augmented and virtual reality technologies. These are technologies that would give you a competitive edge on an international level. And obviously here we're talking about the quantum communication, quantum encryption technologies, and these technologies would widen the gap between the nations. And what I'm concerned about is that the magnitude of the impact of these technologies and the ability to have this technology or not have them really determines the level of your security. Secondly, autonomous smart mobile devices. Yes. Currently, we are now, during this discussion, are focusing on the following problems. Half of the population of the world have the mobile devices connected to the internet. But if in 5 years everyone would have like 20 connected mobile devices, the number of autonomous mobile devices would amount to 7, 10, several dozens of billions. This is a peer-to-peer story that you won't be able to control in real time, and this kind of an explosion of the number of autonomous devices is a threat that we do not really even see. And the third thing is the politicization of the agenda. When the state says, well, I have this lever, I can push the button and I can disconnect some state or some large international player from some technology or some security feature or security system. And I think these three trends really change the picture. Actually, it is very different from the picture that we saw in this audience, in this precise audience during the Congress last year. And I think that these are the things that we need to focus on. The agenda is quite simple. First of all, we need to create the network of trust. This is what Sberbank is doing as a leader in cybersecurity as part of our digital security program and digital economy program. Authorities are doing that too by attracting private and state sector, but the networks of trust is very important. Sharing information about cyber threats, a common platform, these things are very important. Secondly, awareness raising and education. You cannot manage people and what they do. They would generate vulnerabilities, that is inevitable, and only by raising awareness and increasing the level of cyber culture and hygiene, it will be possible to improve the situation. And the third, depoliticization of the global security agenda. There should be no policy here. There is zero tolerance towards chemical weapons and towards using nuclear weapons.
we should have the same zero tolerance to those who try to politicize this global agenda. This is a global international agenda, and the countries just have to cooperate. And anyone who says, no, let's divide the world in these zones, areas, you know, there will be leaders of security and there will be some others who would be excluded. You know, I think any person, any state who is committed to such things should be ostracized, really, on an international level, because the level of understanding of the leaders of the state of this agenda, understanding the importance of that agenda, is something that would ensure our secure future. So these are the three things that would help to improve the situation. And I would also like to add that as a country we have a huge potential, huge opportunities, because we are technology leaders in many cybersecurity fields. Talking about the developing codes, ensuring manufacturer and industry level security. And I would like to say we are open to this depoliticized agenda and conversation, something that the Prime Minister talked about. Thank you.
About to say it's exactly what the Prime Minister said as well, without naming any names, as he made clear. But can I just picking up what the Governor said about the experience of what she sees in the banking business, and we've heard as well from Mr. Greff. Your impression, you have an enormous portfolio. Is there really a very serious human resources, personnel, mindset issue which has to be overcome and has got to be gripped? Because you have a lot of people here, 1,500 people, many of whom are living in the Russian Federation, working in the Russian Federation, who are looking for guidance as to how much they really need to grip the enormity now of the resistance, simply often through a degree of ignorance of what is really happening at the moment.
Well, if
the Minister, Mr. Greff, and I'll...
excuse me.
Yeah, one moment, just to pick up on the portfolios you have, Minister, Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, about the resistance you are finding at the moment.
Well, I would agree. That is the key challenge, the most critical challenge, because, digital agenda, many things that digital agenda is about some hardware and technologies, switchers, stacks and programming code. No, this is about people. And the hardest thing to do is to change the routine business processes. And it is very hard to change these processes in the state. It is especially challenging because there is always the level of flexibility compared to the businesses is not that high. And the second thing, in 1 year we trained more than 1,200 people. We trained them the basics of the digital agenda, so to speak, and our goal is to make sure that this educational program is focused on these relevant issues and would focus on another relevant agenda, and would have to evolve. The key thing is that the CEO, the leader of any business unit or any authority body should focus on training people in this area. Then if we do that, we have a chance. But I would put it the following: 95% of the leaders do not think it is a top priority for their day-to-day work. So it's like as specialists, specialized departments, specialized units. Okay, there is some deputy chairman who is working on cybersecurity, but I do not want to bother with all these things. And this psychology, this mentality is the main problem for this threat. And, sometimes perhaps some CEOs should be attacked, really. Their personal devices should be attacked to make sure that they understand what vulnerability really means. They would have to pay on that.
Slides to be prepared for your remarks, because you want to add another argument to this. So if we could get your slides. But just before we come to you, let me just come immediately back to Alois. 95% of CEOs do not think this is a top priority. I do not want to be bothered with it. Is that what the World Economic Forum and your work is discovering?
Well, I think what is interesting is that these same CEOs see that cybersecurity and cyber attacks or theft of data and information is a risk. However, we do see that on the ground, in action, there's not enough happening, clearly.
Are they blind to it? Are they in denial? What is the problem?
I think
it's a psychological thing, is it?
I think they deal with other priorities, other issues, maybe things that they understand better. And we had a conversation before about the generational divide. And actually, I think it has something to do with us. I didn't grow up with this. So we had to learn this. But the current generation, they grew up with this, and for them it will be more natural. So in that sense, I'm actually quite optimistic that in 20 years we'll have a totally different conversation.
Yeah, but in 20 years, many of the companies could have been hacked out of existence.
Or actually out of business.
Exactly that.
That's why it's absolutely fundamental for each member of a board, for each CEO, to literally, if there's CEOs here in the room, on Monday morning, start talking to the people in the organization.
And keep talking.
And
week after week.
And if you work in a company where you don't have access yet to the CEO, find a way to talk to the CEO, because it's very important that that link happens between the top leadership and the specialists and experts.
Well, let's talk to a chairman and chief executive. How are you coping with this, given the extraordinary investment, Mr. Greff, that you have made, and the scale of what you see now challenging businesses, not just in banking, but also elsewhere?
Thank you very much. Perhaps I would start with just a few facts that I thought were very important while I was preparing for this session. Now, according to surveys, 65% of the people at the start of 2019 confirmed that they were subject of cyber attacks. According to specialists of cybersecurity, 100% of the people were subject to cyber attacks. And as experts think, in 100% of these cases, these attacks were somewhat successful in this level, on this level or another. So there is a gap. 2 years ago, this was 40%. 40% of people were subjected to cyber attacks. Now it's much more than 10,000 versions of new malware appear monthly. 10 million new malware versions in darknet every month. That's just mind-blowing, really. According to Google, the new zero-day vulnerability is detected every 17 days. Zero-day vulnerability is a virus, not a virus, a vulnerability really that no one ever saw before. No one knows how to detect it. No one knows what antivirus should be used to address it. It's like every 17 days. This 17 days, 2 years ago it was 2 times more than that. There were these viruses appeared like once a month, once every 90 days, even 60 days, sorry. Singapore, one of the most secure countries in terms of cybersecurity. But the fraudsters have stolen the telephones and addresses of 15,000 HIV-infected patients from the healthcare system and published these data. This really testifies to the fact that even in such developed countries as Singapore, Singapore is very developed in terms of cybersecurity, the problem is relevant. The last example, in March 2019, in Bahrain, the network of hospitals, military hospitals, were off the grid. The hospitals were not able to function and to make operations because IT systems were fully paralyzed. And actually, our experts were also participating in resolving and addressing these issues.
Now, let me say 2 words about ourselves. We are obviously the juiciest morsel, or perhaps a chunk, in the nation in terms of cybercrime. They really hone their skills on us. They like attacking us. And all of these days, starting from the website of the Cyber Congress and ending with the Cyber Polygon, the Cyber Exercises website, we experienced all kinds of attacks. Spam attacks, DDoS attacks, virus attacks, you name it.
Polygon, because that's important, what you've just been doing with 12 million people.
Мне кажется, что
Yes, I think this is a very important story because for the very first time with our colleagues, and thank you, our international cooperative organizations, we were involved with the central bank, the Security Council, the Federal Security Service, and IBM. IBM actually provided its cloud to deploy the test organization, and we set up an exercise to train international cooperation to overcome a virus contamination. Only 9 nations were involved. I think this is a critically low number, but this is the very first experience, and 12 million people followed us online. This was a test virus that needed to be contained, but the nice thing was that the actual hackers tried to attack us. They tried to penetrate the systems, and they tried to understand what we have been doing. They tried to prove that they are not a virtual, mythical character. I mean, they failed, but we should not be complacent in no way. And this is a good example about how we should move together. Hopefully, we can attract more partners to these cyber exercises and conduct a much more broad exercise. Now, if we talk about ourselves, if we just take this one channel of communication, email, about 1.2 million emails are received daily by Sberbank of all kinds of content, and I tried to do a breakdown of what we actually receive. How many of those emails are, non-standard emails? In 2018, about 60% of emails were the emails that cannot be treated business emails one way or another. They're either spam, about 30% of emails were, a day, about 1,000 emails are phishing emails, and about 2,000 emails a day are all kinds of malware things, and this is daily. And here's another fact for you. Ms. Nabiulina said that the financial consequences are not really material, so you can, not be that agitated about it. In our experience, and we tried asking some of our partners to look into this, and they are professional onlookers, they are professional observers, we tried to research into publicizing the outcomes of cyber attacks. 80% of companies that were hacked tried to hide the actual penetration or virus contamination instances, and they tried to hide the fallout, the actual losses that they were that they sustained. Companies are trying to hide. Mr. Zwinge mentioned Maersk. They lost $300 or $400 million, and they went public with it. This is a very brave company that owned up to it. And they said that we will do everything in our power, do our utmost to never see it happen again. I feel a lot of respect to this company. I'm pretty sure that they will never actually allow this to happen again. But when this is hidden, when this is swept under the carpet, this is a guarantee that this will be reiterated. The company never learned any lessons from an incident like this. If this has been swept under the carpet, it has been mentioned that young people do not really place a lot of popularity on cybersecurity professionalism. According to job search websites, cybersecurity experts are all employed. There's no unemployment among cybersecurity experts. This is a rarity in the labor market. Hopefully, a lot more people go into cybersecurity because this is a surefire way to get employed. Now, if we go back to Sberbank, I have prepared some slides, but this is a good, lively conversation, so forget the slides. You know, in 2011, we wrapped our heads around cybersecurity. We tried running a cybersecurity audit just to get an independent assessment. We were pretty sure about what we were. We had this guy in charge of cybersecurity, and he kept lulling us into confidence. We enlisted 2 companies that did an independent audit. And on a 5-star scale, we were about 2. We had about 2 stars on a 5-star scale. Our employees were not in much agreement with that assessment, but that was a hard fact that we had to stare at. So we adopted a radical decision. We thought that we should draw the conclusions from this weakness. We should get the 5 stars so we can ensure the security for our customers. And we traveled a long way. Over the 5 years, we reconfigured all the architecture based on the cybersecurity requirements, and this architecture now ensures the basic cybersecurity infrastructure. You know, even the electricity is a target. Electricity power supply is the first target because that is the carrier for digital signals. We can't really ensure the security of power supply in the towns that host our vital systems or data centers, but we have created the 3 independent connections, including our own internal power supply generators, so we can run uninterrupted. The second thing that we reconfigured is the basic core infrastructure. We did a lot of things to reconfigure the core infrastructure, and by the end of this year, we will complete the works on this particular problem. It will not be just up-to-date equipment, it will be up-to-date architecture and software. And then thirdly, the software. This is system software and the application software that we buy. The testing, the identifications, the potential vulnerability identifications, configuration vulnerabilities. We subject our configurations to all kinds of assessments and tests. And perhaps finally, you know, any modern bank is a major software generator. Ms. Nabiulina mentioned about those processes. This is a key story. Every process in the organization should be mindful of cybersecurity because we are all about software these days. Any product that comes onto the market should feature cybersecurity. And in every agile squad, and we are an agile company these days, they have a cybersecurity expert. We have 1,100 cybersecurity experts in the bank, and they cover pretty much the length and breadth of all those aspects that I have brought up. And another very important aspect, intra-organization collaboration, because there are a lot of silos. Cybersecurity can be siloed. IT can be siloed. Business functions can be siloed. And this is a reality for a lot of organizations. It's very important to bring them all to the table, to make them work on an agile basis, on a collaborative basis, because unless you are collaborative, you will always be vulnerable. And this is a special track of activities that we pay special attention to. And lastly, this year I spent half a day in Google, together with my colleagues, together with my team. And every day, every time we go, we think, 2 years ago we launched a Security Operations Center, the heart of our cybersecurity effort, and we think that, we reached a certain bar in compliance. We came to Google, we looked at what they have been able to accomplish in 2 years, that we have not visited Google, and I left Google with the understanding of just how many steps further we need to make to ensure the cutting-edge level, the topmost level of cybersecurity these days. And this is an interminable and endless race. And unfortunately, it does require a lot of investments, personal time investments of first executives of companies that have been brought up by a lot of colleagues on this panel. And I would like to thank deeply the Prime Minister that addressed us, the Governor of the Central Bank, Mr. Akimov, that lead by example, that show the criticality of this problem. You can lose so much that you can never recover the losses. And if you speak about the depth of penetration, we invest a lot into the protections of our customers, because this is the only vulnerability that has never really been addressed. It is critically open. Social engineering fraud is so professional about attacking our clients, and the level of professionalism on the part of fraudsters shows that they had targeted pensioners, senior citizens, and these days the most frequently attacked group is the age bracket between 35 and 40 years. They are so sophisticated in their methods of attacking those age bracket individuals, and this is a pretty young, pretty tech-savvy, pretty digital-savvy group. Darknet, according to various assessments, is about 500 times wider than the conventional internet. And you should understand that the threats lurking on the darknet and the communities on the darknet pose an incredible threat for our future. Every technology out there is used by the darknet guys against us. And I keep saying that the core word, that the core keyword here that we are trying to use is cooperation. We can only protect ourselves against those threats if we are able to adhere to all those standards. We need to, never mind those standards, we need to share every information that comes our way, information about viruses and etc. And we don't hide attacks on us. We need to get other people to learn on attacks on us, never mind successful or not.
Let me just give you some guidance. We've got about an hour to run. That means we've got a lot more to cover. And I will be inviting any questions and thoughts from the audience. We've got a lot of microphones out there, so think about that. There's also a survey I want to do in a moment, but I want to pick up immediately in a moment with Craig Jones, who's the Director of Cyber from Interpol, based in Singapore, who's in the front row. We need to understand the scale of this. We're looking at it from the Russian perspective and this region perspective. But I want to pick up quickly, before I go to Craig, Alois, just picking up what we heard from German Gref about sharing. What have you discovered? After all, business leaders tend to not want to talk about their vulnerabilities. It affects their reputation, their brand, and their employability. What have you discovered recently in the World Economic Forum about the willingness to be frank, about the willingness to share, about the willingness to be open, because they're all under threat?
I think the number one ingredient to that is trust. So what we could witness a couple of years back when we created, like in the UK, you have this term Chatham House rules, which means whoever is in a room will never reveal who said what. So we started to have conversations under these rules with 40, 50 CEOs together. And it was actually really impressive to see.
What did it do?
So they basically started to share. So Jim Snabe, who is the chairman of Maersk that we talked about before.
And Siemens as well.
And Siemens as well, and on a few other boards. He actually started to speak up. He volunteered his experience and what he did and how he led the firm and the company through that. And it was interesting how other CEOs in the room started to get up and started to share their experiences and how they dealt with it. What was also fascinating, we had in that conversation the Secretary General of Interpol and other representatives from law enforcement agencies. And that was actually the first time that CEOs of globally operating companies and leaders of international law enforcement agencies had a conversation about this.
And
but
they were really frank, were they? Sharing, listening to what German Greff is saying, the need to share.
I think that was sort of the revelation for all, to say, you know, we have to acknowledge a certain level of or we have to share a certain level of things that in the past we would have declared secrets. It's a fact, you know, it is an issue for your reputation if you talk about it. But if you frame it in the right way, you actually can make a competitive advantage out of this. And there's a few other companies who have followed that example.
Well, let me just check, a reality check again with the panelists. Do you think there is a willingness now in the Russian Federation to share? And obviously, there has been, as the Prime Minister made clear, there is this resistance at the moment for political reasons beyond the Russian border to share a lot. But is there a willingness to share at the moment, Governor? Well, I don't mind who speaks. Governor.
I think the willingness to share went up, but not critically. Yes, we have seen this. We have FinCERT. Inside the central bank, we have the FinCERT, Financial Computer Emergency Response Team. This is a team that is liaising with all kinds of financial organizations on the Russian market. Yet I do think that commercial outfits, financial organizations, will forever be unwilling to share all the vulnerabilities, all the weaknesses, but because that will mean that you'll have to own up to your own weakness. Especially in financial institutions, executives think that this could undermine the trust, the confidence of customers in that financial organization. So we see that the willingness to withhold some information will always be there. So we think that this voluntary information exchange should be combined with supervision over the adherence to cybersecurity standards inside the organization. Again, I would like to reiterate, we have got the powers now. We are running supervisory campaigns inside financial institutions, and we think this is crucial to protect the rights of customers, customer protection for these institutions. That is going to happen. And what Mr. Graf has mentioned, independent audit, that should be developed as well. Executives of financial institutions should be interested in doing independent cybersecurity audit. Internal audits, very important, external as well.
Share.
You know, as sociologists say, we are a very uniform society, an internally coherent society, but then this is a myth to a large extent. The degree of cooperation, the degree of internal coherence, that is really going down. You know, there is a saying, it's pretty comfortable to die in the public. No one is willing to die in the public. If they do die, they prefer the comfort of their privacy to do that. In some part, this is a regulatory decision. Some standards to anonymize these cybersecurity incidents should be developed. You can't really force anyone to divulge anything, because such revelations do affect market cap. They do affect customer trust. There's not going to be any miracles, no matter what we call upon, no matter what we call for at this panel. There will not be any miracles. Good ideas voiced, tech decisions, tech solutions should be developed to anonymize the information exchange, threat information, and certainly the development of the independent tech audit in this sphere. Yes. But I would like to say we are very much at the beginning of the path, and the degree of confidence, the degree of trust is a bit lower versus a lot of our neighbors in this world.
Position, because you, after all, have been setting up a new financial center. You and I have known each other for 3 or 4 years now, when you've been developing it based on international good practice. And therefore, how much have you found that other similar organizations internationally have been prepared to share with you?
Ну,
Well, first off, I would like to remind you that our International Financial Center was established based on the international best legal practices and the common law that the global financial centers run. So by definition, we are aiming to be transparent and open. And our international partners, for instance, we created this stock exchange based on the NASDAQ technology. And the entire security framework that is operated by this technology is available to us, and we provide this to our customers. We also work with our partners from Israel. The Tel Aviv Stock Exchange helps us to develop cybersecurity protocols for our stock exchange, and Israel is renowned for its high cybersecurity levels. We appreciate that we are in a tech race. No miracles to be expected, obviously. Yet some things are cross-border in their nature, and these threats that are cross-border in nature must encounter a global response. It should be an interaction of regulators. It should be an interaction between major conglomerates, corporations. These things do happen, but geographically, it is a bit skewed. And the cooperation within the Eurasian Economic Cooperation, it is a good cooperation. We are exchanging information in that.
Prime Minister in particular, that there is a degree of self-restraint, not willingness to open up and say, look, this is what we've actually experienced, you need to know that.
к сожалению, на начальном этапе это происходит.
Unfortunately, that happens on the initial stage. But the corporations might share this information, as part of the Charter House rules. But that will be a win-win situation, because without that, we won't be able to address all the issues that we face.
We've lost a little bit of time. Are there those out there, any of you, who want to ask any questions? One here. There are 3 or 4 microphones. Now, you're going to have to be restrained. There are 1,500 people in the room, so you're not all going to be able to ask questions. But what I'd like to do in a couple of minutes is come to you and just, in 1 minute maximum, if you can just put on the agenda what is on your mind. And I'm going to take 3 or 4 questions or points. If you can help me, the ladies with the microphones, to find the people. There's a lady there, I think. But first, Craig, can I come to you? First of all, a quick reflection on what you're seeing internationally. If you'd like to, maybe if you actually, your picture will not be up there, so you better stand up, I think. Representing 194 member nations of Interpol, you're based in Singapore, from the Director of Cybercrime. When you hear this kind of debate, and there are probably a lot of people here thinking, is that really going to affect me? What is your word of advice?
So my word of advice is Chatham House rules don't apply to what I'm going to say. So please share this amongst yourselves, with the industry, with the governments. What we're looking to do on our cybercrime programme is to reduce the global impact of cybercrime and protect communities for a safer world. Now, in order to do that, we need to understand the size and scale of the problem. What we're finding from companies, governments, is there is an underreporting to policing of this crime type. So that's fine, we can deal with that. What we do need, though, is the information. So we need the data, the intelligence, what are the indicators of compromise? Then we can bring that into our global programme. We can use that data by collaboration. And going back to your trust point, that's really, really important. So how do we build that trust? It might be through law enforcement and certs working together, with industry going into the certs within the country and then sharing that with the law enforcement, and then they share that globally. And we use that data and that information globally. So that was a lot I'd like to say. Thank you.
But Are you seeing the enormity? Are we reflecting the enormity here, Craig?
So I think if you look at some figures, it's anywhere between 40 to 60% of crime is now online. So there's a massive change around the crime types that we're dealing with and where they are. We're set up to deal with this in a physical environment.
And international cooperation, yes or no?
Absolutely 100%.
100%?
That's what we need.
You need, but it's not
That's
there.
what we need.
Not there at the moment.
Not at the moment, no.
Where is it on percentage at the moment? 50? 20?
You
Think
can give me
about
lots
it.
of different figures.
All right. But it's not nowhere near 100%. Let's get 4 views, right at the back, please. But please keep your thoughts short. Who's got the microphone? There, please.
Здравствуйте.
Hello, my name is Vladislav Vagoda. I am from Sebastopol State University. I have the following question. As part of the cooperation and collaboration between large and small banks, as part of some common system, would it be possible, first of all, to sign some code of conduct in terms of how what should you do in terms of digital security? How do you respond to threats? That's the first question. The second one, and mentorship. Can there be mentorship between large and small banks?
The lady here, please.
Здравствуйте,
Ekaterina Sannikova, head of Technology Center of Deutsche Bank in Russia. We are talking about a lack of talent in cybersecurity, but we see lack of talent in developers, especially developers working in concrete industry like bioengineering, healthcare, coding, and other things. You know, I think we have a major problem with education. It's like 20 years ago that I graduated from the university, but nothing has changed. I think on the state level, we have to rethink how do we prepare digital experts. Hello, my name is Alexei. I'm a student in the university in cybersecurity. Recently, a law was adopted in Russia to isolate Russian internet. How do you think it would affect the cybersecurity in Russia and globally? Thank you. Vasily Ulasov. Don't you think that when we talk about cybersecurity, I mean, if Sberbank would gather the forum of people who are cyber criminals, don't you think that there will be only young people here? Because 17 years is the average age of a cyber criminal. So don't you think that you need to be them? You need to think like them. And so any company that works in cybersecurity, like 10-15% should be 10-15% of employees of cybersecurity companies should be young people.
Is there anyone who's 17 or 18 or 19 who is a cyber criminal in here? Are you putting your hand up? Did you put your hand up? Could you get the microphone to that gentleman there, if he's answering my question and understands it? Could you get the microphone in there?
Where? Yes.
Are you a cyber criminal?
Sorry.
Hold the microphone and then just answer it. No, but this is a serious point about those who can understand it. Did you understand my question? Maybe not.
Can you repeat, please?
Well, if you didn't hear the question first time, let's pause. I was asking for a cyber criminal who's 17 or 18. You're not a cyber criminal, are you? No, exactly. Okay, let's pause for the moment.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think you misunderstood my question because you couldn't hear on the translation. Okay, let's pick up on those 3 points about cyber criminal. Just pause, ladies, for the moment. There are 4 questions there about should we be inviting cyber criminals to a conference like this. Secondly, the isolation of cyber. The question from Deutsche Bank about the major problem of education, which let's expand it to skills and capacity and just physical number of people who understand and can act on what we're talking about. And finally, the issue of a code of conduct and mentoring as well. Can I ask each of you to just pick up quickly any of those points? Alois.
Yeah, I'd love to say a few words about the topic of workforce training, capacity building. I share the concern of the lady in the sense that we don't see the education system changing fast enough. And I think this is really a place where a multi-stakeholder approach needs to happen. The private sector needs to get together with the public sector and maybe also with institutions that can actually finance such programs. And maybe we really need to go a different route, away from classroom to online training, and make it actually easy to make the training for a career. So I think that could be one approach, and I've seen interesting examples in Africa, for example, where something like this is happening.
Does anyone want to add on anything on education and skills, Mr. Kalembatov?
Я, кстати,
I'm also graduated from the same university as you, and we need to change education. I fully agree, and I think that a good example of is Burbank.
два школы.
Yeah, the coding school 21 and coding school 42 is a response that would help to really change the educational system. I do agree with Alois. Online training really helps to involve in that.
Now, what is the demand here? It's easy to say education, but what is needed?
Мне кажется,
I think that it is a challenge for the education system as a whole. We need to educate not only the developers working in specific fields, I do agree with that, but the world that we live in, we need to rethink general education. People should be ready to live in this high-tech technology world, to use this technology safely and to address the risks. And we should not only look, we should look at this issue system-wide. This is a challenge for the educational system. I absolutely agree. It's not the question of educating and preparing coders, because we won't be able to use coders to resolve all the issues. Although, yes, there is a lack of talent, and we are very much concerned with the lack of talent, and we try to address that issue. We have 12 universities who are our partners, and we rethought and redesigned cybersecurity curricula for them, and we help them, we assist them, we have internship for the students, and have special education cybersecurity programs for the teachers, for the professors. But this is a much more wide problem. We need to start with the school education, obviously, and we invest a lot right now to create a school educational platform that would include the soft skills and digital skills and mitigation, and these are of critical importance. And you cannot teach digital skills separately. You know, a son of my friend, I have a good friend in St. Petersburg, and he graduated from the physical and mathematical school, a very famous one in St. Petersburg. I won't name it, perhaps. But anyway, his son said, I want to go to finance university. And I asked him, well, why would you want finance? Get some proper technical education, and then you will be able to have an MA in finance or economics. But he said, no, I'm fed up with all that. But I can't understand. I mean, he was a good pupil, a good student in that physical and mathematical school. And I asked him, why? Why don't you like coding? And he said, coding is just so bad. And I asked him, what language did you learn? Fortran, was the answer. And he said it was so boring. So really, that's it. I mean, obviously, if we do not change the education system, and if we do not include digital skills as something integral, I mean, soft skills is a part of our life. The same with digital skills. It should be across all the topics. The same should happen in universities and at work. I was in Kazakhstan like 1 month ago, and there was a leader of Nokia, CEO of Nokia, who made a presentation, and he said one very wise thing to me. He said, we are regularly retrain all C-level management I mean, our corporate university train 35,000 high and mid-level management so that they understand the situation and understand the technology trends. And he said, yes, Sberbank trains managers, and we retrained everyone starting from my secretary. 100% of our employees are being retrained, and they have this digital skill training. And I thought, yes, that is good. And this is a good showcase of the survival of Nokia. Perhaps this is why they survived. I thought that was a good example for me. Perhaps I need to think my educational program.
Survival, when Microsoft took them over. But let me just adapt. Governor, can I just hold one moment? Let me just adapt that important question. It's not new, but that question about 17-year-old cyber criminals. In the state sector, Deputy Prime Minister, there's a limit to what you can pay people. And it's a classic problem now that those in the late teens and then their 20s think they can make much more money by criminality. Is there a new economic model that needs to be developed, maybe through the World Economic Forum, where those who are really smart and want to earn a lot of money can actually do it inside banks, financial organizations, maybe inside the state? Because it's not unique to Russia, but you can't pay very much. And so it's, I can give you other stories on that, but how do you square that circle between skill, age, and the value that they could have in this massive transformation?
Well, as for education, I have the same case, really, but it's just that, Mr. Grab, I mean, I would build on that. And I said, I said to my children, you have you are digital natives. And, my children say, well, there's nothing to do with that. There's nothing to do with that digital environment that we are having right now. I mean, there is a gap. There is a gap between young people and older people, obviously, and we need to close this gap in terms of technology. Like a week ago, I had a Chinese manual for the fourth year school children for AI and ML. Great methodology, really great. It's on paper because children need that, but there are some kits and control panels, and it has all this culture of algorithms. And children can actually learn, school children can actually learn this logic, really. So yes, mathematics in school and technologies and IT, these are key things. So the question is not about the money, really. We have a major culture gap, and we're working with Sberbank actively to close this gap, because in Sberbank was able to successfully address this cultural challenge. We have a huge cultural gap. I mean, it's not about the salaries. It's like people who want to have a taxi back home, to have a T-shirt and to wear Crocs. They are living in shorts, shorts and Crocs. So we culturally belong to different worlds. But what can I give them in my authority, in my state authority? But it's not the salary, but the adequate challenge, the adequate lifetime challenge that they might address. And they would be able to grow as young specialists. And they would say, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I did this and that was cool. This is their language. This is my vision, I was always the young specialist. I was a young mayor. And now when you started to talk, I understood, yes, that I have to go to this, basically retirement group. I'll soon be a retiree now. And if we, as a state, close this cultural gap. I do not know the situation in the Bank of Russia. Perhaps they do face the same problem, but we need thousands of these people, thousands. If we're able to close this cultural gap, money will not be that important. But actually, I talked to my colleagues from Singapore. They said that up to 3/4 of, we can deliver 3/4, 60% of the salaries. We can pay that, but we have a multi-fold difference in terms of state salaries and salaries in the paid in private companies.
If you invite me back, I'll come in my T-shirt, my shorts, and my Crocs. Okay? That's a deal, and we'll all sit here in different gear, so we'll convince everybody. Let me go to the Governor and also Mr. Kilimvetov. On this issue of talent and how much you pay,
Мне кажется, вот мы достаточно подробно обсудили, что все системы образования.
Well, I think that we have discussed extensively that the whole educational system have to change, but after a person is working in the market, he or she is searching the way to gain money, and that's the main driver, the main motivation. So we need to create the system that perhaps is not nicely developed in our countries, like accelerators and innovative system, that would fund the companies that can enter the markets. And perhaps these young people would not work directly for the authorities, but they might be a part of the PPP program, and the government would outsource their services to them.
I ask you to have that ready because we've got 5 minutes to run. Governor.
About young talents, we have no other choice but to attract young people, to make sure that they are not only criminals, but they would be among those who fight with these criminals. And we need to find these incentives. And we're talking about material and non-material motivation. In our FinCert, we have 32 years of average age, despite the fact that in the central bank, well, central bankers are conservative organizations. The average age is much higher, therefore. But we try to find these young people and motivate them properly. And actually, the victims are becoming younger too. You said it was like 30, 40 years. Unfortunately, perhaps women are more trusting, I don't know, but this have to be a concern for us, and this really should testify to the fact that we have gaps in terms of the educational system. We think that these digital natives are everywhere, but not all young people are digital natives. Not all of them have the proper skills, and they are vulnerable to cyber threats, and we can see that. But I would have to answer the question about small banks and small organizations. I think this is a critically important question. Right now, building an efficient cybersecurity system in any organization is very expensive. We understand that it is very expensive to address the risks that have not been yet materialized, and not every organization can afford that. So obviously, for small organizations, you need standardized and cloud-based solutions. You need outsourcing.
And together with the Association of Russian Banks, we are studying the sufficiency of these template solutions. A lot of organizations are offering that to the market. But this question that you asked originally, the lack of understanding of the need to do these things shows a low demand for these outsourced services. We need to really think long and hard about this, because the provision, the supply of these services must grow. SMEs cannot be hacked out of the market. We need to ensure the sufficient protections.
3 minutes left. So can I ask you to go to your handset? Because I want to find out how much, obviously there are many people here who weren't here last year, but we want to make a comparison between the same survey last year and the result sitting in this room today. There is the same list of questions to last year. Who poses the greatest cyber threat to you personally? You can answer 1, 2, 3, or 4. Firstly, illegal hackers and fraudsters, handlers of personal information, in other words, the tech companies, other people, and the government. Who poses the greatest cyber threat to you personally? You can only answer once. %35 from illegal hackers and scammers, 42% from personal information holders, the tech companies, 3.8% from other people, maybe because that's a bit vague, and 18% from government. Let's make a comparison with last year. Illegal hackers and fraudsters last year was 27%. I don't think there's much statistical difference here. Handlers of personal information, the tech companies, was 44%, so that hasn't changed much. Other people, only 9%, and the government, 19%. So Mr. Greff, there's a consistency here in the answers, even though this is a statistically unrepresentative audience. But at least it gives an idea of you're still worried about the same things. Finally, in our last 2 minutes, Alois, you come here from Geneva, from the World Economic Forum. You have amazing access to very large companies in particular. How much is what we've heard today in the last 2 hours here a reflection of the enormity of what you are wrestling with still in your cybercrime operation? In other words, have we been frank enough? Are we franker? Is this the kind of thing which could be repeated? Because one of the things behind it all is not just 9 countries in the polygon, as Mr. Greff said, it should be much bigger. Whether there's any will, whether there's any practical capability of having cooperation, trust and collaboration on a multinational basis.
I have sort of a two-faced answer. I think if we have the expectation that formal bodies like UN bodies, for example, will bring us fast answers, then I'd say probably not, even though there's excellent work being done in those organizations. But the experience over the last few years, looking at the willingness of people from various parts of the world and from private sector and public sector actually to get together, to share information, to share experience, like we have seen over the last days with this polygon exercise, actually it makes me slightly positive and hopeful that we can build on that. And I think the fact that 12 million people have followed that polygon exercise, I'm sure that will help us to show and to grow that bigger in the next year. So I think there is clearly hope.
Even if there's a will, is there actually a determination to do it now, do you think? Because it's existential.
I think clearly people have realized that it's a global phenomenon. Countries have borders, the internet has no borders. So we have no other choice than actually work together on a global scale.
And the message for them, don't think it won't happen to you.
A, and B, as I said before, when we talk about collaboration, don't wait till somebody decides way up to collaborate. You can go Monday morning, think, who is an important partner for me in the private sector or in the public sector, depending on where you work, and start thinking of concrete collaboration projects that you can develop.
Well, thank you all very much indeed. Whether you're paranoid or not, and you want to keep it to yourself, there's been a very clear message. This is changing incredibly quickly. We've heard it from the Prime Minister. We've heard it from our 5 panelists. If you sit on your hands and hope it won't hit you, you're probably living in a world that isn't actually developing in the way that most of us have seen here. So can I thank the panel? Can I thank Mr. Greff for hosting us? And also to all of you for your stamina as well for the last 2 hours. Thank you.